All right, and welcome. We're about to start the ACUHO-I Virtual Roundtable Global Perspectives. And I'd like to extend a big welcome to all our participants here this evening. My name is Edwina Ellicott, and I'm going to be the moderator for this virtual roundtable. Just to introduce myself, I'm the Senior Manager for Occupancy and Communications at the University of Wollongong. And supporting us here this evening, behind the scenes, is Spencer Geese. And before we get started on the webinar, I'd just like to extend a huge thank you to Spencer. It is actually 2 a.m. in the morning in the USA, and he has made himself available to provide this support to make this happen for you this evening. Just a quick overview on some of the resources that are available to you as members of ACUHO-I. I actively encourage you to go into the website and have a look at these. There's the online community that provides a really important networking opportunity and chat line for members, and there's a whole range of topics and expertise that is available there. All of these virtual webinars are being recorded and are available on YouTube, as is this one. This one should be available at the close of this particular session. And again, I encourage you to go in and have a look at those and have a listen in your spare time, and also share those with your colleagues if they're not able to make this particular webinar. I'll also draw your attention to a range of COVID-19 resources that ACUHO-I have made available to us. So there are the straw poll results, which some of you may have participated in those. And also, as I said before, the virtual webinars and roundtables. This session is going to take quite an informal approach, so we want to just encourage you to ask as many questions as you like. So it's going to be very conversational, and the value that you'll get from this is by asking lots of questions of our esteemed panelists, which takes me to our panelists. I'd just like to introduce them to you. We have Rebecca O'Hare from the UK, we have Laura Burge from Australia, and we have Sally Kean from Malaysia. What I'll do is just ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves, tell us a little bit about their country, what the situation is like in their country at the moment, and tell us a little bit about their institution, and also a little bit about their actual role where they work. As I said, my name is Edwina and I work at the University of Wollongong. I'm the Senior Manager for Occupancy and Communications. So as you could probably imagine, this particular topic is really quite relevant to me and something that I feel very strongly and passionate about. I'll now turn to Rebecca. And Rebecca, perhaps if you could start by introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about yourself and your situation in the UK.
Morning everybody, my name is Rebecca O'Hare. I'm Head of Partnerships and Resident Experience with the Student First Group. And interestingly, I don't work in an institution, I work for an organisation that consults with a number of university partners here in the UK, and also with a large number of private student accommodation operators, where I previously worked for about 5 years, and I'm working in student accommodation and in the area of student experience for 12 years now. In the UK, we are slowly emerging out of lockdown. The big topic at the moment is what September will look like, which I can imagine is the same topic of conversation in many countries right now. And some institutions are deciding to go online until January. Some are going online for the entire year. Some are saying we're open and this is how we're going to do it. So very interesting time in the UK, very mixed reaction to it all, but one that is very complex, as I'm sure you all agree.
Thank you, Rebecca. Laura, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, please?
Sure. My name is Laura Burge. I'm the Student Experience Manager at Deakin Residential Services in Melbourne, Australia. We are in the middle of our academic year here in Australia, so it's been trying and challenging for a number of other reasons, I guess. We're in a position at the moment where we have about 30% occupancy. We would normally have around just under 3,000 students living on campus across multiple campuses here. And we are at the moment, I guess, in a space, particularly here in Australia, where we're fortunate that coronavirus is far more reduced than in many other countries. So we're gauging interest, I guess, in a return to student accommodation for our second half of the year.
Thank you, Laura. Sally, can you tell us a bit about what's going on over there in Malaysia and at the Purple House? Can I just point out too how we intentionally made the slide deck purple for the Purple House?
Wow, thank you very much. That was my question in mind when I came on board.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm Sally. I'm the Director of Student Community at Purple House. We managed about 10,000 beds in residences across 7 locations, and we have a support team of around 200 people. And just allow me to briefly update you on what's going on in Malaysia. Responding to COVID-19 situation, the Malaysia government issued a movement control order, so whereby all business were ordered to shut down, except for essential services, and the people are not allowed to go out, even for a walk in the park. And we are only allowed to go out for essential errands, for example, grocery shopping. So under the MCO, we've been for 8 weeks, and the situation here is getting better, it's under control. And so things are slowly getting back to normal. And during the MCO, all our residences are fully operational. And at the moment, we have around 1,500 students still staying with us physically. Thank you.
Thank you, Sally. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. I'm going to start with a general question, and it's really to do with, one of the challenges around COVID-19 is just actually making sure that there is a consistent message delivered to all your students and possibly across your institution. Laura, if you don't mind, I might start with you. To what extent does your institution help to drive the message, or within your student residences, or is that something that you do as yourself, as determined by your own division?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we work really closely with the university here at Deakin University in terms of what we're permitted to do and what the arrangements look like in terms of keeping students on campus. We did have a directive that students were required to vacate if they were able to do so, other than obviously students that were interstate or overseas. In terms of the actual communication though, certainly other than the communication that students were receiving from the university about their studies, we were directly responsible for that information. And our approach was very much that they were receiving, that core content via, email, I guess, and in terms of anything campus specific, we have our own campus Facebook pages that are private to the students that live in that particular accommodation. In this instance, it was a bit unusual because we had students that still remained on campus and also those that vacated, and we've maintained those communities so that those communication channels are still open.
Okay, thank you, Laura. Sally, can you tell us a little bit about how these communications played out at the Purple House?
Number one, we actually have a centralized team at each residence who are in charge of the communicating with students officially. And we also actually draft out standard replies to those frequently asked questions so that all our team members are on the same page, especially considering the situation is very fluid and we have information updates all the time. And also we actually have utilized online survey so we can actually gauge students' well-being either on site or they're already at home, and also to gauge what else we can do for them, what kind of events we can organize for them.
Okay. Wow, that sounds great, Sally. Thank you. Rebecca, tell us a bit how you were managing those.
Well, guess I'm not obviously institutional based, but from what I've seen in the UK sector is that generally across the board, you will see universities respond by having dedicated web pages where they will regularly update content and information. It was commented at the very start that you saw a number of universities not necessarily engaging very well in social media and utilising social media to the best of its ability in order to keep students informed of what was happening, which I guess is not great, because that, you know, we should be speaking to students where they are at, but we have seen that slowly change, and then marketing teams utilising those resources a lot better to keep students informed. The one thing that I would say is that sometimes messaging is going out to students that maybe perhaps staff themselves haven't been made aware of. So you've got students asking questions about, I don't know, getting back rental fees, for example, or when they can go back and collect belongings, but the staff on site necessarily haven't been communicated that message at the top. So there's been a disconnect between the both, which is something that actually probably should be thought about in advance, or at least for some institutions or some operators would certainly be a learning to improve upon post-COVID. So very mixed bag. And I think what's important is that if you are utilising any form of social media or any comms, that you keep it consistent, keep it clear and accurate, you know, write it in plain English so that all students from all nationalities can understand it. But also, you know, don't be afraid to use those social media channels and meet students where they're at. We've seen some institutions use YouTube really effectively, making great video content, Twitter, you know, very simple posts on Instagram. And I think if you're doing those as well as all your usual email content, then you're reaching as many as you can in a very clear way.
Yeah, it's certainly a challenge, isn't it? And particularly in the timing and determining who gets the message first, or are they delivered in a simultaneous format. So it certainly takes a lot of planning and ensuring that you engage with all the appropriate stakeholders. Can you tell us, well, you know, I'm interested to explore what some of the other challenges that you faced in communicating to students. And Rebecca, I might stick with you while we're talking about that, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. I think what we've seen is obviously the UK has a huge cohort of international students who some have chosen to stay, some have flown home. So when you send out any communications, there's always going to be the time zone issue where it's going to reach people at different times. And often when they get that message, if it's via email or if they see it online via social media, they'll want to respond there and then expect a response there and then. But, you know, someone's asleep in the UK or they're not at work, so they can't respond there and then. So that kind of frustration builds up and builds up. What we're also seeing as well is, particularly in social media, is that where students are not asking questions or following up on an issue or looking for an answer, is that parents and guardians are taking to social media and speaking to universities or departments or private student operators, demanding answers and wanting an update, and when can their son or daughter go and collect their belongings, and why can't they do that? And that's really interesting to see that movement. The other thing that I've noticed, and thankfully I haven't been subject to this, but I have seen colleagues who have, is that there are lots of us in the sector now who have online professional profiles, particularly on Twitter, to network, to share information, best practice, to mingle at conferences. And we have seen people now seek out people from different institutions and operators and almost attack them online. Now, I understand why that's happening. I understand the frustration behind it all, but people are actively seeking out people who work in different institutions. And I think that's something that is probably getting discussed behind closed doors in different institutions. But I would think that if it isn't being discussed, that perhaps there's got to be a way to handle that. You know, if someone is being targeted in that way, if someone is constantly getting tweeted at or wants an update on something, you know, who responds to that? Is it the person who owns that account? Should the marketing team step in? Should the marketing team help respond to it? I've seen lots of different approaches to it. Some people respond themselves. I've seen CEOs of organizations step in and respond. So that's a really interesting development. I think that's something that's kind of slowly built up over the last year or two as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Rebecca. I mean, it's certainly creating more awareness to a lot more aspects of social media and how to use it effectively, and also some of the risks associated with that too, because it is so sudden and so instant, and the expectation is that there's a response straight away. So it's certainly very challenging. Laura, can you tell us a little bit about your experience in this space?
Yeah, I think to me, and I'm sure this was the same for all of us, it was just the amount of rapid change that we had to cope with in the sense of, you know, one day we would think that we were in a position to be able to communicate to students that they could gather in a group of 5 people, and then the next day it was 10 people, and the next day it was 5 people. And it is really challenging to try and communicate that to residents in a way, you know, that they don't feel, you know, that they, you know, that we're getting that message out, and that then we're not, I guess, issuing disciplinary breaches and the like when they're not behaving in an appropriate way according to state and federal requirements. So yeah, it's about communicating that rapidly changing space in the best way possible as well. So I think that to me was certainly the biggest challenge we faced.
Definitely. And look, I have to say too, converting that message into student speak, so a government regulation, and then interpreting that into what that looks like within a student residential environment. And that creates a whole range of challenges too, because there's not a lot of guidance in that area. So yeah, it was certainly very challenging.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, you know, students were wondering, why can't I have my, you know, my significant other come and visit? But then it's about, well, what, you know, who do we need to focus on here? Is it our student body, or is it the, you know, and the wider community? It was a real, you know, difficult area.
Certainly was. And then also I think we were finding too that there were other expectations from us in terms of, you know, communicating to them what you're allowed to do in the external environment. And you have to start thinking about, well, you know, what are the boundaries of what we are communicating, and what, you know, they need to take from the state government or federal government or whoever your authorities are there. Sally, you must be facing some challenges there too with communications, given your situation and demographic.
Yes. I would just like to share like Laura's challenge and Rebecca's, the challenges some of the institutions in the UK facing. Differently in Malaysia, our situation is a little bit unique here. Is students, during the MCO period, students were not allowed to travel back home. So they are, you know, they are required to stay in the residence, and they were given less than 24 hours notice. So at the beginning of MCO, this was not clear. So some students actually managed to travel back home. Then the government realized this huge human movement, which is essentially the taxi for the virus, moving across the country. And so they suddenly put a stop, and the higher education of Malaysia tell us, you know, students now not allowed to leave the residence to travel home. So to deliver that message, you would have imagined that students would rather be with their family if given a choice, isn't it? So, so how do we make sure that their well-being physically and mentally are taken care of, and they are willing to do their part, you know, by not going back? You are doing your part to control the situation. So while we are doing our announcements, all the do's and don'ts, what our team always keep in mind is, number one, to give the assurance their well-being is taken care of, and second is we'll share openly with them what our plans are, you know, to safeguard the community. And the third one is we make sure that we communicate with them what they can do to contribute. And I think that panned out, worked quite well. So I think it's giving them assurance, and then also let them know they play a part in this.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that personal and community responsibility, and that is a really important part of the messaging, you know, that goes out. So, you know, collectively what they do will help to, you know, hopefully mitigate the spread of the virus. So yeah, certainly that was a very important message. Student leaders are really effective sources of being able to communicate with students. Obviously, they're great influences within the community. Sally, we'll go back to you. Can you tell us how you've managed that communication, whether you, I guess, have specific communications for your student leaders, or reinterpret that for your student leaders and ask them to then communicate it on to the rest of the student body? Or also, you know, did you have special considerations in terms of your timing of communications? Did you have that luxury? So I know that sometimes we had to get messages out there really quickly, and it just wasn't always possible to, I guess, repurpose that message for student leaders and then get it out. So can you tell us a little bit about your experiences there?
Yeah, of course. So for us, we, as much as we can, we get student leaders involved in the operation, and especially community building. In this COVID-19 situation, what we've done is, like you say, time constraint. So we won't be able to actually deliver different messages to the student leaders as to the residents. So what we've done is they will receive the same announcements as students and as and when. But however, we do actually have WhatsApp group and also talk to them on Zoom and to explain to them about the announcement and why we make such decisions and stuff like that. So they will be in a position, be able to explain it to their fellow students. And on the other hand, their involvement is more heavily in e-engagement. So we do into the approach of student engagement. You can't meet physically anymore. So we're trying to be creative and see what can be done online instead. So then I think that will be more suitable for student leaders in this situation, instead of putting them on the spot, explaining to their fellow residents about government instruction orders and directives. So their involvement is more on the fun part. So really engage students and get them feel more comfortable in their own rooms. Yeah.
Great, thank you. How about you, Laura? Can you tell us a little bit about how your communications have worked with student leaders and the role that they play?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've also faced the challenge that our residents only really had about 1 to 3 weeks on campus before all of this unfolded. So our student leaders really missed out on the opportunity to do a whole lot of community building that normally would have occurred over the time of the year. What we have found is that, you know, the large majority of our student leaders were part of the groups that returned home, unfortunately, but that they, off their own back, have really initiated a lot of the community building in the online forums. So they've stayed really connected on Facebook. They've led a lot of the initiatives in terms of TikTok challenges and trivia nights and all that sort of thing. And I think that's really helped to drive that community, even though it was such an, you know, they had such very limited time to form face-to-face before it was off-site. So I agree with Sally that they are so critical in maintaining that peer-led connection. And hopefully, depending on what happens for us in the next couple of months, they'll be able to resume in those roles and actually completely reform that community in some shape or form.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. I mean, they really do play a critical role, don't they? And in some respects, I really feel for them too, because they also have to play the role of sometimes being the enforcer of, you know, some not such great news or, you know, new types of behaviours. So yeah, it's a tough job. Yeah. Rebecca, how about you? What's going on there with student leaders?
I guess very similar to what Sally and Laura was saying, actually, just picking up on Sally's point about using Zoom meetings and WhatsApp. Certainly myself a couple of years ago, working with student leaders, I would probably have been against having like WhatsApp groups with student leaders, because I would have felt, oh, that's very unprofessional and I only use WhatsApp for personal use. But actually it really is becoming the norm now, where you've got, like, you know, work WhatsApp groups. And I think it's important and actually quite a positive step to establish those groups now, because again, it's using media in a way that students use it. And if you set those parameters in place and boundaries about what the group is for and what it's not for, it's absolutely fine to have those kind of groups to communicate quickly and efficiently with student leaders, regardless of whether there's a pandemic or not. I think actually this is something people can take forward with them, and it's a very, very useful tool. Certainly I've seen with previous teams that I've managed and worked with, where they work closely with resident assistants, they found it absolutely more effective than like having a face-to-face meeting every week. They would have monthly face-to-face meetings instead, and then use WhatsApp for day-to-day kind of business. I've also seen resident assistants where, you know, the end of the year is looming now, and so their contract may have ended and they'd be going home anyway after exams, and they've been like online Zoom farewell meetings / parties, and, you know, almost an awards to try to recognize the work they've done throughout the year, but also to give even more thanks for the work that they've done during this particular time. So I think that's really important. The thing as well is also we've seen sometimes not so well is where student leaders are not included in discussions or sat around the table for key decisions or policy making. We've got a really strong student union and very well established student union movement in the UK, and always have done. So they're very vocal, and they're very vocal with institutions if they're not sat around the table or involved in key decision making. And sometimes they sit in a very weird space where they're representing students, but they're also like student governors on university boards, and so they have information but they can't share it with the student, and they're in that very weird, strange place, and they're asked to comment on things at very short notice sometimes. So I think if you haven't got students around the table for key decisions, ask yourself why that is. Can you change that going forward? I would like to see, certainly in halls or in private operators, more student councils, more student groups where they're consulted on a regular basis about key decisions. And I get that sometimes, certainly during this pandemic, it's very quick, like Laura said, it's 24 hours sometimes when things change, and you can't always do that. But certainly for where you've got longer decision making, that's something that I think we should all hopefully take forward with us and start to think a bit more about how can we, you know, include the voice of students a bit better.
Yeah,
and I think that on that topic, Rebecca, you know, one of the things we noticed was that our students were so keen to give feedback and to get involved in that process. And I mean, we completely had to throw out our traditional survey engagement model with our students, but we ended up facilitating a really brief engagement survey with residents that were both remaining on campus and that had moved off campus. And I noticed, Bess, you asked about, you know, the wellbeing. We obviously couldn't effectively measure their wellbeing in a survey, but we certainly did seek their feedback about their feelings of sense of belonging in a virtual space, as well as separating that data by on campus and off campus to get a bit of a gauge about where we were doing well and how students felt depending on where they were located. And that we had a huge response rate, you know, considering the competing demands on students' time and what other challenges they were facing in terms of transitioning to online study. So I second that. If you're not already involving students, you should be, and they are super keen to actually be involved and give their feedback and have a voice in the kinds of things that we're doing at the moment.
Yeah. And they're usually a really accurate gauge of, you know, what the sentiment is within the community. So it's certainly an important resource. We've talked about a couple of communication channels, and certainly we're all talking about new channels that we're starting to use. You know, Rebecca, earlier you mentioned how WhatsApp was deemed quite unprofessional a year or so ago, and now it's, you know, forming a WhatsApp group is sort of a really effective form of communication. We've seen the emergence of TikTok, and, you know, isn't that a fun channel to use? There's the you know, almost traditional social media forums now. There's our Zoom meetings, the traditional emails. Are you using anything else, any other channels? And, you know, how effective or ineffective are they? I mean, you know, to some extent we can do a bit of face-to-face, but, you know, any other channels that you're using that you are finding varying results for?
I have seen operators and universities use chatbots. So chatbots have definitely had a bit of a surge in the last couple of years, where you can get some automatic replies, or that they can, I guess, you know, in one sense it's used to alleviate the amount of traffic coming in at particular times of year. So if people have got queries about intake, or maybe deciding what university to go to or course to do. But certainly during this time, I am sure chatbots where they're in use are in overdrive. So I certainly see the use of that. And I think there's a misconception that chatbots sometimes might take over the role of somebody and someone might lose a job, but having spoken to Eric Stoller, who's like an expert in this particular area, it's certainly not been the case. In fact, it's just helped alleviate the response rate and make things a bit better and get back to students in a quicker way, and really help them provide answers on some, because a lot of questions get repeated over and over again, and when that happens, that helps the chatbot learn and to gather that information. So certainly lots of chatbots getting used by different companies in different institutions, and I think that's becoming more and more the norm globally.
So this sounds very Big Brother, the chatbots, don't they? Laura, have you seen any other different channels or use of any different methods that are more effective or less effective in this environment, or just experimenting with new channels?
Yeah, it probably isn't so much any particular, new channels. It's more just, I think we've all become much better at using technology. And I think students have also come to sort of accept, these different versions of how we're communicating with them. So, I noticed that there was another question there about, welfare checks and that sort of thing. And certainly, even if it is just picking up the phone to a student, there's just been a far more receptiveness to actually having that conversation, whereas we'd often find in the past that you certainly wouldn't have had that conversation with a student unless you ran into them face to face in a corridor or at a function. So to me, it's been more about the doors that have opened because of the pandemic, in a way, in that there is a willingness of people to be far more communicative and let us know where they're at, perhaps more so than ever before. So yeah, I think that's a real advantage of what technology has done for us, in a way.
And that's certainly got to be a positive, doesn't it? Having that capacity to have more of an avenue to talk to students. Sally, how about you? What are you finding that's working effectively there, or not so effectively?
Of course, for communication channels, I think we've been using all these channels like emails, WhatsApp, phone calls, the social media, even SMS. So we've been using all those. It's just that during this period of time that we've become more creative, and like Laura said, more receptive of how to make those channels more effective for our purposes. And I found a very interesting thing is for students, because we have the number of students just huge, and we won't be able to pick up the phone call to talk to every one of them. And we have the amount of inquiries coming through email, phone calls, asking about pretty much the same questions. So what we've done is actually we use email as the official communication channel. So we really collectively gather the frequent asked questions, and then we actually have a general notice 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we send to every one of them. And so to answer majority of the questions. And unfortunately, those we tend to make it shorter, but those announcements can be many pages to make all the matters clear to everyone. But surprisingly, students do read through the long pages of announcements. I was surprised to know. And so we found communicating with large body of students, email is still the most effective way. And also followed by SMS. So for example, we noticed like there's certain students, few hundred students have not responded to our online survey, for example, telling us whether they're in the residence or they are actually travel back home already. Then we will actually follow up by SMS. And for particular students, if we need to check on their welfare, then we pick up the phone or give them WhatsApp message. And I would like to share something very interesting I found is, whereas email is most effective way to communicate with students, but with our staff team members, email now becomes the least effective way of communicating. Instead, what we do is we actually have more frequently Zoom meeting, WhatsApp groups, like Rebecca said, and also just pick up the phone call. I realized that my phone has, I constantly need to charge my phone because I've been on the phone all the time. So while email for students is effective, but for staff now, we just sort of just summarize up things, decisions I've made. Yeah, I found that very interesting.
That
for
is
different group of people.
Yeah, that is really interesting, Sally, because some of the feedback that we've been receiving from students is that they just don't read emails, certainly long emails. Like if it's more than a couple of sentences, they won't read it. They're far more used to consuming the message in a digital format or a video format via YouTube or social media. Just jumping back to social media, we've got quite a few questions that have jumped in. And hi, Bess, lovely to hear from you. Bess from South Africa. And Bess has asked a question about student leaders and stating that they cannot engage with fellow students in the way that they used to, even though they are using social media and online channels. They still actually can't measure how students are coping. So when you have those face-to-face conversations, it's a lot easier to sort of gauge how people are actually coping. Are you using any strategies to determine, whether you're getting the real message from students to determine if they are coping well or not? Rebecca, I'll throw that one at you if that's okay.
Yeah. That's a really tricky one because it looks different in different institutions and with different private operators, especially depending on whether they have a Res Life department or model or student experience model or framework, whatever you want to call it, because it's known as different things in the UK sometimes. So where we've got student leaders physically in the building with students, we've done the usual things of like knocking on doors, checking on students at a social distance, and also talking to students via virtual events. So virtual communities and virtual Res Life activity has been like the key thing the last couple of months across multiple countries. So it's really tricky because you're always going to miss people, unfortunately, and it's about really knowing who is in your residence, who has gotten home, is that up to date, stay in touch with those students, because even though there are some students who will have stayed initially, there may have been some that had then chosen to go home for whatever reason, if they're in the UK and they can actually travel home. So it's about having that core data, I think, correct in the first instance, so you can know to check upon them if they need to do that. Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult one to answer, if I'm really honest with you, because you can't measure it, really, can you? Unless you're churning out a survey of sorts, and everyone's got Zoom fatigue, never mind survey fatigue right now. So it's a really tricky one. I'd be interested to see what Laura and Sally say, if I'm honest.
No pressure, Laura, but we'll throw to you now. Yeah, I mean, look, Rebecca has touched on it, but we, in our case at DRS, at Deakin Residential Services, our student leaders aren't responsible for monitoring welfare, so to speak. I mean, obviously they have a role to play in being our ears and eyes, I guess. But certainly our campus life staff are responsible for conducting those kinds of welfare checks. And our approach has been that we have conducted one-to-one Zoom/phone call based welfare checks on all of our in-room residents. There was about 450 or so of those plus, and that's been really effective, I guess, in engaging, where students are at and how they're feeling. For any students that we were unable to make contact with for a variety of reasons, they don't answer their phone, we have conducted those door knocks. And yes, I mean, it's hugely, I guess, resource intensive, and it does depend on the scale of your building and operations. But for us, it has been a really effective way of just making sure that we have had a touch point with students. And I guess another key thing that we have used is, and it's been hugely popular, bearing in mind social distancing restrictions, is what we've called food drops or study pack drops. So we have actually, dropped off donuts to doors and little study packs and highlighters and colouring pencils and, drawing things, so that students are actually getting an element of physical contact, as well as having, for us, the ability to hand on heart say that we've seen that student and we know that they're doing okay in some way, shape or form. But it's certainly not, it's not an easy one to do when we are predominantly in a virtual space.
I'm sure it's really much appreciated, Laura, just having that personal interaction from staff, and I'm liking the donut drops too. Very happy with
we actually had that prior to coronavirus, but and they were always very popular. But now we've had that personal touch of it actually ending up at your door, and it's certainly been very well received. One of our most popular things.
I'd also just add to that, actually, I've heard of another operator, and we haven't mentioned this, is they phoned every single student. I don't think they had a huge amount of students in their building anyway, maybe like 400 students, and they phoned every student regardless of whether they were in halls or home to ask, how are you doing, how are things, how are you feeling, which is a really lovely gesture. So you can pick up the phone as well, and you know, if you're not too social media savvy, that is always an option as well.
Of course. Just try to share from my perspective, and I think students either we're perpetually in virtual space or actually face to face. If we are taking care of a big number of students, it is hard to be able to touch based on every one of them. During this period of time, what we've done is through online surveys, or that of course you won't be able to get to the bottom of everything, but we actually use online survey to gauge, is there any particular group of students require our attention? For example, from online survey, we noticed that a bunch of China students at early part of this year, Malaysia actually have a ban around Chinese New Year time. The situation in China was really bad. So Malaysia actually has this 14 days quarantine imposed on China students, whoever travel back from China. So we actually have quarantine units on site. So we let them know, explain to them nicely, we're here to help you to facilitate this 14 days quarantine. And we are here to support you with 3 meals delivered to your doorstep. And then we'll take care of your laundry and all this essential items you need. We do grocery shopping for you. And then we realize after that 14 days, when they actually move back to the normal unit, and these students might face peer pressure, is looking at you, whether, so kind of out of fear, so we, through online survey, you actually identify that particular group of students from China. So we actually have Zoom and party with them. So we deliver food to their rooms, and we all gather our Zoom and dinner and share, what's going on in their life. And from there, we gather, what extra things that we can do for them. And another one is for individual students, I found very useful is just to open all channels. So you have our frontline staff meeting up with students if they come and collect their parcels. If they see something not right, they actually flag and then pass to our student community team, and also our counselors on campus, if they are talking to students, and they can just share with us, maybe this student requires additional attention, things like this. So just keep all channels open, and then we'll be able to identify.
Yeah, and certainly, Sally, the channels seem to be extending more and more. So there just seems to be more and more channels now being made available to us, which is on one hand, a really positive thing for us, because it enables us to communicate with our students in so many different ways. However, monitoring the responses throughout all of those channels, firstly delivering the message and ensuring that it's consistent across all of those channels, but then it's two-way feedback, isn't it? So being able to monitor all those responses and draw that into the funnel and understand, all the varied messages and really just keeping on top of all of them. It's certainly quite challenging. I'm going to just change track a little bit here now, and because we've spent quite a bit of time talking about students in residence, so just shifting it to talking about students that departed and some of the techniques and communication strategies that you're using to keep those students engaged, so those students that have departed, and perhaps some of the strategies that you're using to, I guess, communicate if they can come back, when they can come back, and why they should come back, like why it's a good idea, or perhaps not such a good idea to come back at this stage. Laura, are you able to talk to us about that? Because I know quite a few of your students did depart, or quite a large number of your students from residences have departed.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously it's still very early days in terms of what our next trimester looks like, and whether our students will be in a position to return subject to government restrictions. But certainly we do have plans around, we've communicated with them as frequently as we can, and certainly every time there's been any kind of update from the government, we've followed that up with an update about how that impacts them in terms of their student accommodation status. We've been very mindful that many students, you know, if we lose them effectively now and they choose not to return in our second trimester, or they choose not to return, they're only offered a place much later in the year, that many of them obviously won't return because it's just far too much effort to relocate all their belongings again. And potentially they may not even return in next year, even though they haven't had the full experience. So that's certainly been we've been very mindful of that. What we are hoping to do is, if we can offer students a place on residence in the second half of this year, is that we will be providing them with far greater amounts of education perhaps than we normally would for a second half of the year, and we will be providing with a specific COVID-based induction. So all of our students always have an online induction that's compulsory, and we use the Future Learn platform, and they have to complete an assessment task in order to be able to actually move on campus in the first place, and that covers our rules and our values as well. But in addition to that, we'll actually be hosting Zoom-based inductions specifically covering what does life look like on residence for this year, so that they do have a really good awareness of that. Whilst we want to, you know, as much as possible be offering them the experience that they expected and that they wanted when they first chose to live on campus, that there are going to be some differences and some restrictions, because the last thing we want is any student to come back and then with unrealistic expectations about what life will be like, bearing in mind that keeps changing. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so Laura, with the Zoom-based inductions, will that be conducted by staff or by student leaders, or by a mix of both?
A bit of both. We're just in the process of putting those together now, but we expect that there'll be obviously sort of some core content that'll be covered by staff, and then we'll hopefully be able to involve our student leaders in terms of providing information as well.
Certainly for new students, I mean, what a great way to have an introduction, you know, to put the face to the name of the student leaders and also the staff that they'll be engaging with when they arrive when they arrive in your residence. Yeah. Rebecca, what are some of the strategies that you're using for departed students?
So very, very similar to Laura, actually, so that, you know, comms are going out as and when there are government updates, which can be sporadic at times over here. Yesterday, there was guidance that came out from Universities UK about what universities should or should not be doing if they are choosing to open in September, and how they, you know, look at the health and safety aspects of that. What I have seen work really well is some really engaging video content on YouTube. So for example, the University of Bolton, which would be a low tier university in the UK, and would heavily rely on having student numbers and students coming to university and paying tuition fees. They have put out some video content about, well, what is life going to look like at university in September if you choose to come to Bolton. So certainly managing their expectations, which I think is really important, because the big conversation over here is, well, what is the new normal? What's that going to look like? And in terms of residents, what's that going to look like in university-owned residents? What's it going to look like in private landlords, so like houses? What's that going to look like as private operators? What does it look like if you are in partnership with a university in accommodation and not in partnership, and who regulates that? Because there's not necessarily any regulation around that. So that's a big topic at the moment, big talking point. In terms of students who have departed, so guidance have come out from a number of organisations about collecting belongings, when you do that, how you do that. Some students are really keen to go back because they left and didn't take anything with them. Some students took lots of things, and what is left hasn't really got any sentimental value or financial value, so that's fine. And some students are just left and not communicating about it at all. And, you know, universities and halls are taking the stance that, you know, you need to let us know by a certain date so that we can choose to either send them back to you or that they get removed and put into storage temporarily for a period of time so you can claim them. So very, very similar to what Laura's doing. We're talking about a lot about inductions, and I think managing expectations is the important thing. The talking point over here, as well as the new normal, is that universities are now in competition about who's going to open and who's not going to open. So going to campus is the new competition, is the, you know, competing factor or the unique element or USP of that particular institution. So that's really interesting as well. And, you know, you've got Cambridge who've come out and said that they're going to do most of their teaching online. Well, Cambridge can do that because Cambridge are a prestigious university, and it doesn't matter if you're doing your course online because you're still going to get a degree from Cambridge. So does that really matter in comparison to somewhere like Bolton where they need students to come to university? So yeah, mixed bag, which is my term of this webinar, I know, but really is.
I think everything's a little bit of a mixed bag at the moment. I mean, just so many complexities and elements to all of it. And Sally, what are you experiencing over there in Malaysia?
Well, I think we actually been doing what Laura was talking about, communicating with the students who actually departed, and also Rebecca mentioned that, you know, about their luggages left behind. So we did actually provide service of like packing and send them back to the students, and also we have something we provide students. You can actually keep the room if you can pay a very small holding fee, so that we don't, you know, you just. This room is for you when you come back next semester or even next year. So then we, on one hand, we will not lose the student, and the students will not don't need to bother to make the journey back and back home, you know, the return journey. So by giving them this option, I think that students really appreciate that. And also, I think it's really interesting mentioning about people still prefer face-to-face classes. Just e-learning just doesn't cut it. I think that's why the competition is about.
Yeah, definitely. And you know, hey, it's all part of the university experience, isn't it? Like, you know, coming onto campus, meeting other people. So it's certainly a very different type of experience at the moment. We've probably got time for one more discussion item, and then we're going to have to wrap up. I mean, this has been going unbelievably quickly, and it's just been fascinating conversation. I wanted to ask a question, and I probably already know the answer to it, but has anyone had their budgets amended in a favourable way to be able to support these additional communications? Because it's certainly been, you know, the whole situation certainly required a lot more communication, a lot more considered communication, throwing resources towards it. I mean, fortunately, digital and social media can make communication very inexpensive. However, like personally, we've found the need for some more print communication and signage, for instance, and just ensuring that had to be done very, very quickly. So Rebecca, can you tell us a bit about budget? Has that been impacted in a favourable way for you, or I suspect no one's getting a lot of dollars thrown at them at this stage?
Yeah, I don't think many are getting a lot of dollars or pounds, as it would be in the UK, thrown at them.
Yeah, or resources.
Or resources, yeah. I think what you've seen is that, you know, going to say something like Residence Life, where you might spend an awful lot of money running events and activities, actually there's been savings because it's gone virtual, and actually the activity that they've been doing has cost significantly less. Now, what I hope doesn't happen is that they go, oh, well, we'll just do it this way all the time going forward and reduce that cost, because it's still important to do face-to-face activity as and when we're in a position to do that. I think where people have seen budget cuts is a freeze on recruitment or positions they were hoping to have. Obviously, lots of staff being furloughed across institutions, and now we're in a situation where some institutions are heavily concerned about whether students are going to come to university and they'll have tuition fees, and does that mean the institution is going to significantly reduce in size, and then obviously departments will get reduced down as well. And we've seen that kind of come to fruition in other countries as well. So certainly I personally haven't had loads of money thrown at me to do things, or departments or operators that I know of. I think my fear, like I said, is that it doesn't then become that Res Life gets less money going forward. If anything, they need more and more people, so give them more money if you can.
Yeah, if only.
If only.
Laura, any good news there?
Yeah, no, I would very much echo what Rebecca's saying. It's probably more allocation of funds as opposed to additional. But yeah, and hopefully we end up in a situation next year where we can kind of revert back to normal.
Yeah. Sally?
I'm probably in a better position because I allocate the budget to my team. So for sure, so every year I actually look at. So student community budget is actually, for us, it is a percentage of our rental revenue. So it makes sense that when all these things happening, our occupancy is affected, and we even actually give out rental rebate for students to just share the pain. So revenue is affected. Definitely our budget this year will be cut. But however, like Rebecca said, things actually cheaper if you do it virtually. To me, if we come back next year, things have return to normal or the new normal, I believe it's still tied back to our rental revenue. So we shouldn't cut it. And student engagement face-to-face and this kind of money spent, I believe, for any residences or university, it is it's a way of marketing, because the best marketing is word of mouth. If your students are happy, they know that you really care, and you take care of them, and more will come. They will tell their friends, they will tell their brothers and sisters. So that's what I believe.
Yeah, definitely, Sally. And I think we're all working towards just, doing things more efficiently, faster and smarter. Now we are just about out of time, and just on a final note, I just want to ask all of you to just give some final imparting thoughts on communication or anything to do with the COVID-19 situation. So just any final thoughts in that space. And Rebecca, I'll talk to you first.
Sure. I think what I would love to see, and this is more something for people to take away and ponder, is that definitely over the next 12 months or 18 months, we're going to see loads of people talking about this at conferences and how they responded to COVID-19, whether via communications or operationally or whatever. And what I would love for people to do, if they're not doing already, is document what went well, but what didn't go well and what you learned from that, and to bring that to conference also, because we can sometimes always talk about the great things, and we're really good at that, and I love that stuff. But I'm really interested to see when things didn't work out so well, and how you as an institution or an operator responded to that, and how it made the team feel at the time, what was the impact on that, and what you did to rectify that and resolve that. I think something like that, I'd love to see a lot of that now over the next 18 months. So one to consider and take away.
You can start writing the conference paper now, Rebecca. It sounds like a great topic. Great. Laura.
Yeah, I mean, I would echo Rebecca's thoughts. I love it when people also talk about the challenges rather than just producing that marketing spiel, because we are all, trying to learn from each other. I would certainly say that, I guess, flipping that, I would love to see people look at what has worked really well and take that into the new normal, because I think we have adapted, we've tried out new forms of technology, we're doing things really differently, and I think we've got an opportunity to take some of those things rather than just going back the way we were. So whether that's the way we communicate with students or the events that we run, maybe it is a blended approach, because we've certainly attracted students perhaps to activities we wouldn't have in the past. So yeah, what can we learn and take with us?
Yeah, it's certainly a shift in the way we do things, definitely. Yeah. Sally.
Oh, well, I would like to just come back to today's topic, communication. And I do believe that we should be communicating with our staff team and students as transparent as possible. I do believe that the well-informed community will actually less likely to panic. And also, this is what I keep remind myself through this period of time, is to focus on what's within our control. There's so many things that we can only influence, and so many things that is out of our control. But if after you cool down, take a few deep breaths, then really focus on what you can do. And when we communicate with students as well, we try to shift the direction of asking them to look at what they can do, So that kind of give you power. Thank you.
Great words, great. Well, that's all we've got time for, unfortunately, at this virtual webinar, because I think I could keep talking about this particular topic for hours. And firstly, I'd just like to extend a huge thanks to our esteemed panellists, Rebecca O'Hare, Laura Bird and Sally Kean. Thank you so much for imparting those words of wisdom. I've certainly got a few really valuable takeaways from the discussion today. A big thank you to ACUHO-I and particular Spencer for staying up really late or getting up really early, whichever way you want to look at it, to support this. It's really appreciated. And last but certainly not least, to all our listeners, so to everyone who joined us today. So we have had people listening in from the UK, from Australia, from South Africa, from Malaysia, from the USA, and from Italy and a range of other countries. So we've certainly had a really good representation from the global membership of ACUHO-I. And before we go, don't forget to check into the ACUHO-I website and have a look at all those really valuable resources that they have available to you as members. Thank you so much for joining us, and I hope to see you again soon at the next Global Perspectives virtual webinar. Thank you.